a huge game coming up and not just because it's week 1 and the Bengals are looking to redeem themselves, but it's a divisional game. You start the season out at home. It's a team that the Bengals have had a lot of success against lately. So big game there. Scott, what are a couple of your keys to victory? I mean, we've talked extensively with Matt now about the game and the outlook of the game. We'll get to our predictions at the end of the show, but what are a couple of your keys to this week as the Bengals host the Ravens to open the season?
Well, I mean, Matt really nailed one with Justin Tucker. I mean, he is a phenomenal kicker, and I know Bullock won our competition, whatever we want to call it, with him and Jake Elliott, and still we have, somehow we have both in the roster, one on the practice squad, one. So I guess one key is to keep Baltimore from crossing the 50-yard line, to keep Justin Tucker out of field goal range. Short of that, I think the other key is anything we can do to build a big lead. I mean, really go aggressive, push the ball early, because especially with Flacco being out for a while, this is probably the best chance. I know he's a big arm kind of guy. If you can, and they have those deep receivers, someone like Mike Wallace, but the timing's probably not there. They're probably several weeks behind from where they should be if he had been there all training camp. So they're probably going to be able to run because they like to run. They may not. They have the big guys, the Marchionda. They're going to want to pound the ball if they can get the lead. That's what they're going to want to do. Probably kill the clock. But if we can somehow just really push it offensively, get aggressive, get some sort of lead, get big turnovers, and just really try to build lead, force them to throw the ball with a passing game that the hope isn't in sync yet. Rashad Perriman's obviously not become a great elite receiver. Maybe at some point he will be worth the first-round pick, but as of yet, he has not really earned that. Macklin is new. They have new pieces there with a quarterback who's been hurt all training camp. So you kind of think, okay, there's probably going to be a few things there they have to work out and tweak. So if you can force them to throw in a passing game that probably isn't quite in sync yet, to me that'd be the biggest thing you can do is just build that lead, force them to throw, hopefully get some pressure with some of these young guys like Jordan Willis and Carl Lawson, along with Dunlap.
You melded them together. You melded them together. I like that.
Well, they're so good. They just become
one ultimate defensive lineman. I like it.
Yes, and Dunlap Atkins on the other side.
Yeah, there you go. Gino Dunlap, yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I'd say that's the biggest thing. Anything we can do to build that lead, to really force them to throw in a passing game, it's probably not going to be in sync yet. And hopefully that leads to a bigger lead because they're off cue. You're trying to force them to throw when maybe they're not ready to throw. Really throwing that new pressure we have at them, which they haven't seen from the Bengals in a while. That kind of pressure. So for me, that off the top of my head, I'd say that's the not the only key, but definitely a key.
Yeah, and for me, I look at a couple of things, and I agree with you on one of the aspects, but I'm going to take it a little further. I think if the Bengals can take care of that short stuff, the dump-offs to Woodhead, the dump-offs to the backs, the little crossing route, Flacco's a really interesting NFL quarterback to me. It's either huge bomb down the sideline or down the middle of the field, or check down, check down, check down, check down, check down. And when he has a running back who can catch the ball, can make plays in space, that's where Flacco really has a nice security blanket. If the Bengals, without Perfect and and Sean Williams at safety, a couple of others, if they can get that stuff, minimize the damage from those type of plays, all of a sudden then that doesn't open up anything deep because the rest of the defense is, it puts the Ravens offense into a 3rd and long type of situation, and the Bengals defense is ready to pounce and is, capable against a long passing play that they're pretty much certain of seeing. So I think if they kind of can limit some of that stuff, limit the damage from the running backs in the passing game, I think that will really rattle Flacco. And then obviously, the Bengals, they don't blitz that much in terms of bringing extra guys, because what they do is they have a lot of good guys up front, and they mix them around, and they say, you know, our corners are going to be kind of on an island a little bit, and we're going to get to your quarterback without blitzing guys, and we're going to use the rest of the guys in space and try and help out there. So I think if they're able to kind of utilize that game plan, get to Flacco, keep everything in front, I think that's key. And then obviously the young cornerbacks that are filling in for Adam Jones are key. Darqueze Dennard seems to be a top, which was a little surprising because, Scott, you and I talked about the whole – I think we had a question a week or two ago from one of our listeners about, you know, is it Jackson or is it Dennard? A lot of things we had been hearing and seeing was that Jackson was going to be there. And if you saw the recent release of the depth chart, it's Dennard that's atop the right cornerback spot and not Jackson. Did that surprise you at all?
It does. I mean, I'm kind of hoping that, at least based on what we've seen on preseason and what we've seen from Dennard in the last few years, that is more just Marvin saying, hey, I like my veterans, I'm going to put them on top, and not so much that's who I'm going to start, which we can probably get into that later. But yeah, it did surprise me just based on the fact I assume you want to win, and you're not just wanting to put all the veterans on top. So I think everything all Bengals fans have seen from the preseason, William Jackson III looked like the guy that was probably going to be the starting outside cornerback over Dennard.
We've already got our first, at least that I've seen, our first, I don't know if you want to call it a bold prediction or a whatever you want to call it, from Adrian Vallejo, says Chris Smith will deliver the first sack for the Bengals this year. So not Geno, not Carlos Dunlap, not Michael Johnson. It's going to be Chris Smith coming off the edge, according to Adrian, to get the first sack of the Bengals season. I mean, we're going to talk about news and notes and stuff. I guess we can kind of segue this into that with the depth chart talk. Any other surprises? Go ahead.
As I said, there was one. I mean, you had a really good point, I think, about the safeties and Burfict being out.
Okay.
As far as covering, you know, the tight end, and regardless of who's playing tight end, if it's Max Williams or, you know, the 36, 46, however old he is, starter they have there, Ben Watts, whoever they grab off the street to play tight end, we just don't seem to cover them well. And with Burfict out, I look at out, you know, Sean Williams. That does become a concern. Last year, the Bengals were 17th in the NFL in third down conversions on defense, at just under 40% allowed. And, you know, that's the kind of thing where, you know, that's the perfect spot for something like that. You know, you dump it off to Danny Woodhead, who, for whatever reason, he doesn't look the part, but he always seems to, you know, make those catches and convert. So, yeah, I think that's going to be a big thing is, you know, can Vinny Ray, can Nick Vigil, they talk about Nick Vigil as being, you know, a decent speed guy who can, you know, you don't have to take off on third down. Can those guys cover when it comes down to it? You know, can they, or are they just going to let the guy, you know, basically position himself in front of them, get the 5 down catch, 5 yard, not 5 down. This isn't, I guess, Colorado. 5 down. Never mind.
I understand. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, we're both old enough.
Let's actually back up. For those of you that didn't understand that reference, this is something from the 90s. I believe it was mid-90s, and this was University of Colorado. Rashawn Salam, Michael Westbrook, and I believe Cordell Stewart were all on the same team. So there's your little sports knowledge. Go look up University of Colorado 5 downs. That's the reference Scott made. Scott, I got you, buddy. I got you.
And I think they got a national title because of that, because the Big 12 officials gave them that 5th down.
They did.
Anyway, yeah, stopping those 4th downs, because every little, you know, because when you have a kicker as good as Justin Tucker, I mean, any little 5-10 yard, you give him our set downs, you give him 10 yards, you keep letting him get closer. Well, you're in field goal range. And I know someone commented in our YouTube chat how great it would be to have someone like Tucker. And, you know, two kickers, hopefully we can combine them together and get Tucker. I don't know if we can get Randy Elliott or Jake Bullock to somehow become Tucker, but yeah. Long story short, I totally agree with what you're saying about stopping those 3rd down conversions with the little dump offs with all those guys out.
Yeah, and
That's what I'm trying to say.
Wait, Scott bringing the humor, the historical perspective. I love it. I love it. James Napke says a hot fudge sundae says Bullock has at least one miss, and if you've looked at Randy Bullock, you know he's probably had a couple of hot fudge sundaes in his day. No offense, Randy. And then, as you mentioned, Justin Tabor says, could you imagine having a kicker like Justin Tucker, not having to stress about extra points and anything under 55 yards? Yeah, we haven't had that for a while. And I love this key from Royal Flush 513, a loyal listener. Good to see them back in the YouTube chat. And do not drop interceptions or miss fumble recovery opportunities. And unfortunately, Vincent Ray, as much as I like the guy as a human being and as a Charlie Hustle type of player and a guy that the Bengals like, he's made some egregious errors in this area. The wild card game against Pittsburgh comes to mind. He had another one or two last season. And those are the differences in games. And if you look especially at the Bengals in 2016, some of those games were very close. When you don't catch the interceptions, even if it's early in the game, you don't really think back to it. That's a big play. When you don't convert extra points, field goals, those are big plays. Those are the difference between wins and losses. And hopefully that's not going to be the issue with the Bengals this year. Kind of harping on with what you're saying, and I don't want to go too long on this, but you're completely right about the linebackers. You talked about Nick Vigil. You talked about Vinny Ray. Vigil was a guy, if you remember, the coaches really liked Emmanuel Lemur, and Emmanuel Lemur was this speedy guy, this rangy guy who was going to be the next big good cover nickel linebacker for this team. He had a couple of interceptions for the team when he finally got the starting gig. I believe it was in 2014. But other than that, never really materialized, landed with Zimmer in Minnesota. To your point, Scott, the Bengals for a long time struggled covering tight ends. It got a lot better under Zimmer towards the end of his reign as the defensive coordinator with the Bengals, and it really has started to kind of drop again. You notice that if you really want proof, go back to that Patriots game last year where Gronkowski and Martellus Bennett absolutely torched the Bengals in that game. So you're right. Whether it's Max Williams, whether it's Ben Watson, whether it's Nick Boyle, the Bengals are going to need to find an answer to get tight ends under wraps. When Sean Williams was injured in the preseason, you saw a couple of guys step in. Granted, it may or may not have been their assignments, but all of a sudden the Chiefs, a backup tight end has 2 touchdown catches in that game. So these are guys that are going to be playing. Josh Shaw, Darren Smith. So they need to step up, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think without that, everyone needs to step up. I mean, all the new players, Randy Bullock obviously needs to start making kicks in the regular season that count. You obviously hope Pat Sims steps up now that he's considered a starter. Nick Vigil, Vinny Ray, Trey Hopkins now that he's a starter. But I guess I'm getting too far ahead into our next segment. But to your point, yeah, especially with all this.
No, it's good. It's a good segue. It's a good segue.
I mean, long story short, basically everyone needs to step up. I mean, you kind of know what you're going to get from the veterans. The thing you don't know is what are you going to get from all the new faces. Now that Tyler Boyd has a bigger role, now that you have a kicker who they've kind of thrown their hat in with, they kind of picked up off the street last year and said, nope, this is our guy. Forget the 5th-round pick. We're going with this guy. Or we love Andre Smith. We've had him forever with this love-hate relationship ever since we drafted him. Forget that. We're now going with Trey Hopkins. And, some of these other decisions they've made, you kind of hope that these guys are going to produce in the regular season like they do in the preseason. And, Joe Mixon, the guy we love to talk about and who we would give the ball to 40 times a game if we could. You hope you don't see a fumble like you did in the Washington preseason game, and you hope that everything you've seen in the preseason as far as those little flashes emerge.